right, well, I want to welcome those of you that are on Facebook Live. We're so glad that you're joining us this morning. We hope that your experience has been great this morning already. And we are just so honored to be able to come into your space through the screen, and we're just excited about that. Also, welcome to Exeter. Once again, we want to make sure you feel warm and welcome as well. We are so excited that you're gathering together in the Exeter area. We say Exeter, but we know that you come from all over the county, which is amazing. I was there last week with you, and it was such a privilege to be there and to have the warm welcome that I received. So it was really fantastic to be with you in Exeter. All right, so on the seats close to where you are, or should have been right where you're sitting. You might even be sitting on it. You're not even where you're sitting on it. Depends on how last night went. I want to take a look at this with you for a moment because we're coming to the end of 2019, and one of the things that we love to do at the end of a calendar year is talk about our financial initiative that wraps up the year. And if you're visiting with us this morning, you're a guest here this morning, just realize that we don't talk a lot about money, but this is just something that we do every so often as an in-house conversation, so I just want to make you aware of it. This year-end's initiative is called Accelerate, Fuel for the Future. And we're very excited about this. Our leadership board is very excited about these three particular categories that we can fuel the future with our financial giving as we wrap up 2019. Let me just say to you these three things. First one is community fuel. I have to tell you how excited I am about this, that our community impact team, and this is our London team, Exeter, you're going to be developing your community impact team over time, but our community impact team has been investing in the northwest corner of London now for almost 5 years, and we're very excited about investing in future leaders. So we're going to send 2 teenagers to Forest Cliff Camp for their leadership week. And we're in the process of putting some plans together to make sure that that happens, but not just to send them, to give them money and say, here you go. We're actually talking about what would it look like for them to incorporate it into the context of our church as well. So very excited about that community fuel. Plus, with that comes, we're hoping to send 8, our intent is to send 8 children that are under-resourced as well to Forest Cliff Camp. We believe that this camp has an incredible influence and impact on children's lives. And I know the director personally. He's a fantastic guy. The team is amazing, and we're just so excited to be able to do that. So community fuel is the first one. Second one is missional fuel. You see the dynamics of this missional fuel that are important for us. This coming winter, we're going to offer Alpha at both of our locations. We're just wrapping up Alpha right now in our London location. This week is our wrap-up coming up this Tuesday night. Alpha is a video course that introduces people to the Christian faith and answers some of the questions that people have about faith. And we're very excited about making that happen again this coming winter in both Exeter and London. We're going to be starting those in January. It takes resources to make those things happen, and so we're going to be investing in that. Missional fuel is gear and equipment. You know, it's interesting when I think about gear and equipment. We're a portable church at both of our locations, our physical locations. Our gear takes a beating. If you were here earlier this morning, you would see evidence of that. We had a very tough morning technical, rehearsal-wise, because some of the gear, plugging it in, taking it, unplugging it, takes a beating. And not that our setup teams are abusing it by any stretch. They are fantastic human beings. We love them to pieces. If it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be gathering like this. But we also just need to look at some of the gear upkeep and equipment. The third one in missional fuel is the development of next-generation leaders. I want you to hear me on this as clear as possible. We believe as a church that it's absolutely essential for us to thrive, and doing that, we have to build into future leaders, next generation leaders, younger leaders that are coming up through the ranks in our church, which we're very excited about. Part of what we're going to do in the investing is sending them to the Canadian Church Leadership Conference this coming June. We're in a partnership with a church in Barrie called Connexus, and they host this Canadian Leadership Conference every other year. And we want to invest in these leaders and get them to this conference. I've been to it twice already, and it is a fantastic leadership conference that I know that these future leaders will bring home some stuff that's very important for what they do here at Vital Point Church. The third one is global fuel. I'm really excited about this year. We're transitioning into a partnership this year with Compassion Canada with the Hygiene and Washroom Project. And as you know, water is an essential part of developing countries. Clean water is absolutely important. And I've seen this firsthand in Africa and different parts of the world. And water can make such a difference for people. And so we're going to look at these particular 3 areas. Now, what I want you to consider is this, as you think about the Accelerate Fuel for the Future, is that I want this to be very much a faith piece for you. I would really love to see this as a spiritual thing for you. So I don't want you to just kind of enter in and kind of go, okay, I can do this and just give the money. What I want you to do is I want you to think about it, pray about it, and allow God to scare you. Okay? God can sometimes scare us with, are you sure you want me to do that? And then you enter into the faith process of trusting Him with that. I've seen this many, many times in people's lives. I've seen this in my own life. And so my hope is that you'll pray about that. If your kids are old enough, if you've got kids, invite them into the process of that. Keep in mind this, that the gift is above and beyond what you're already giving. If you're giving at Vital Point, at one of our locations or online, whatever it is, that's fantastic. Keep doing that. But this is above and beyond that. So like if you give like $500 a month, whatever it is, you can't go in December, designate that to Accelerate. That just doesn't help us any. It doesn't work that way. So if you can consider above and beyond, that would be fantastic. The methods in which you can give, you see them there. You can give e-transfers, which is to accounting. I wish I put the email on there for you. It's accounting@vitalpointchurch.com. You can go to our website, do the online giving, or just the plain old, simple, good old baskets as they go by on Sunday morning. And just indicate Accelerate, okay? What I love about this is that our church, Vital Point Church, and if you're part of it or maybe you're just here for the first time, you need to know that we are about creating this safe place for people to explore and grow in faith. Those are 2 important words for us, explore and grow. We love when people come into our context, into our environments, and they feel safe. They feel like they can be here. And maybe you've been experiencing that for yourself, that you can be here with your questions and your doubts and your wonderings, or maybe you're not even sure if God exists. You can come into this space and you can explore. But we also look forward to having your roots of your faith grow stronger and deeper. So I'm really excited about how this unfolds when it comes to our resources. We as a church, what we do takes money. And the mission and vision of this church takes resources. And so please consider the Accelerate Fuel for the Future. And if you're really sharp, you can find the spelling error on this, and you can come to me afterwards and tell me what it is. All right? Yeah, someone had already pointed it out to me. We got a spelling error on it. So don't come and tell me afterwards. I already know it's there, but if you can find it, you can email me or text me, whatever. All right, let me pray, and then we're going to jump into the conversation this morning. God, we are so thankful for our church, for this church in particular. God, we thank you for the things that you're doing through us and in us. God, we're so grateful. God, we know that you have an incredible future for us that we're living in right now. This is our moment as we look to the future. God, I pray that you would just be prompting us, nudging us, guiding us, scaring us a little bit as we consider what it is that we can do and our contribution to this year-end initiative called Accelerate. Thank you, God, for what this church is about. Thank you for the mission and vision that you've given to us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so my question for you is this morning as we jump into our conversation. The question is this: have you ever had the wind knocked out of you? Have you ever had the wind knocked out of you? Anyone? Anyone can remember that? Yeah, put your hands up if you have. Some of you have had that experience. You know what it's like. You take that hit. Maybe it's in a sporting event, or maybe you're riding your bike and you hit your chest on the handlebars and the air goes right out of you. It's a terrifying experience when you have it happen. A number of years ago, I was playing soccer for the German-Canadian club in the Masters, which is old guy soccer. And we were playing a game against another team, and this was a number of years ago, and there was a 50-50 ball. And that means basically it was anybody's ball, and the guy beside me, he and I were running towards it. It was anyone's ball, and he was bigger than me, but my determination was bigger than his. And I got to the ball just before he did, but he arrived relatively the same time, and we had this massive impact. It was huge, side to side, shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow, side to side, and I hit the ground full force, wind knocked out of me, in excruciating pain. I was gasping for air. Now, as air began to come into my lungs and into my very being again, all I could utter was, "Did he go down as well?" That's all I could get out. My friend Steve Alb, who I played soccer with at the time, started laughing and said, yes. My response was, good. Because if I'm going to lie on the ground, he better be as well. One of the things out of that, which is not necessarily relevant to the conversation, is I broke 2 ribs at the same time. And so I ended up finishing this soccer game with 2 broken ribs, which is not fun. But the air was knocked out of me, but when I got air back in, it was so refreshing. I think about that moment, and I think about our lives. I think sometimes we need the air knocked out of us. I mean that figuratively speaking, obviously. I think there's times when we need the air knocked out of us because we sometimes go through life with our blinders on. We go through life automatically just thinking this is life and it's mundane, it's boring, and we're just kind of moseying through life like, that's the sound we make. I think that's the sound we make anyway. And sometimes we need an interruption, right? Sometimes we need to be jolted awake. Sometimes we need to be uncomfortable. No, we don't like it. Obviously, there's something wrong with you if you do, but sometimes we need that. But there's sometimes I'm also convinced that we need it when it comes to our faith. There are sometimes we need it when we think about faith or we have a perception about faith and church and God and Jesus. Sometimes we need the air knocked out of us to help us to step back and get perspective because there are sometimes we try to fashion our faith around what we perceive it to be, leaving God out. Or we sometimes even try to fashion who God is, and we often do it after our own image. And so sometimes we need the air knocked out of us so that we can actually take a step back, get new fresh air in our lungs, and move forward with a new perspective. Today we're wrapping up our Abide series, and this is what we've been doing for the last number of weeks, is we've been talking about this idea of getting the air knocked out of us so that we can get a new perspective, a new idea of how to live out faith in a relationship with Jesus. This word abide is what we've been talking about. This word abide is a very interesting word because it emerges from a teaching of Jesus. Jesus spoke about this idea of abiding, and he actually used it with the word remain in. There's a section of the Bible called John, written by a guy named John. And he's this guy that kind of hung out with Jesus and captured the stories of Jesus. And there's this moment that he talks about in John chapter 15 where Jesus teaches very clearly about this idea of abide in him. I want to read it for you, and then we're going to jump into understanding what it is applying to us today. This is the passage we've been using for a number of weeks now. John chapter 15, verse 1. Start right from the very beginning of it. Jesus says, I am the true grapevine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch of mine that doesn't produce fruit, and he prunes the branches that do not bear fruit, so they will produce even more. You have already been pruned and purified by the message I have given you. Remain in me, and I will remain in you. For a branch cannot produce fruit if it's severed from the vine, and you cannot be fruitful unless you remain in me. Yes, I am the vine. You are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will produce much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing. Anyone who does not remain in me is thrown away like a useless branch and withers. Such branches are gathered into a pile and burned. But if you remain in me and my words remain in you, you may ask for anything you want and it will be granted. When you produce much fruit, you are my true disciples. This brings great glory to my Father. See, one of the things that we have been learning and discovering about this idea of remaining in is this idea of abiding in him, is that when it comes to the Christian faith, the relationship with Jesus is the pinnacle relationship within the context of the Christian faith. That this idea of the relationship with Jesus is where we find nourishment for our souls, where we find nourishment for our faith. Part of how we do that is the continuation of abiding in. That idea of remain in or abide in also carries with it the idea of the continuation of being in the relationship with Jesus. And so we've been talking about practices that Jesus has given us, or rhythms or patterns that he has given to us that allow us to continue in that relationship. So we've talked about things like meditational prayer. We've talked about things like the intentional faith relationships. Last week we talked about Sabbath, this ancient word that kind of connects to this idea of resting. And today it's this idea of simple abundance. Simple abundance. There's been something I've been thinking about as I've been pondering and wondering about how to wrap this conversation up in this series, is that when we begin to live intentionally within the relationship with Jesus, so Jesus is not sort of an add-on to your life. You're not, you just don't pull out Jesus when you feel like pulling Jesus out because you need him. There's this idea of when we intentionally abide in him, when we by faith walk in that relationship, what begins to happen is that we begin to realize what simple abundance looks like. Now, you're probably going, okay, Ron, what is simple abundance? Well, simple abundance is very clear. Simple abundance is this idea of this word simple is uncomplicated, and abundance is large quantity of something. So the simple abundance is a way of living in our Christian faith that doesn't push or pull from the things of this world. So what happens to us is this, is that sometimes we go through life believing that our satisfaction, our contentment will come from the things that we have. It will come from the material gains that we have in this life. Now, what's interesting about this, and I want to be super clear on this because I don't want you to leave misunderstanding this, is that the things of this world are not bad or wrong. Like having things is not bad. Like accumulating things is not bad. But what happens to us oftentimes in our pursuit of contentment, in our pursuit of satisfaction, is that we believe that these particular things are going to be the place where we find those things. So we accumulate, we stockpile, we get more, we accumulate. And what Jesus is trying to help us understand is that when you go through life, it's not about those things. It's about being in a relationship with him, and therefore these things find their right place in our journey of life. That they're not the priority, they're not the pinnacle of your life. That the relationship with Jesus is the one that matters. I find this interesting because when we look at our lives, we can see this so clearly. We can see how at times we get pulled or pushed towards the things that we believe are going to satisfy us. Like I think about Black Friday coming up, right? Think about Black Friday. I mean, how many of you are already planning the sales, right? How many of us will drive by a big box store on Friday morning, bright and early, and see a lineup? There is something about it. The videos that are going to come out on Friday are going to be epic, especially south of the border. It's going to be crazy. We see these videos. What we're seeing in this is that our culture and our society, there's this push and there's this pull. Now, what's important to understand is that this is not the way it used to be. See, the contentment and the satisfaction for the first two human beings, named Adam and Eve, found that satisfaction in God. Their contentment was in God. They were created in perfect union with God. They did not search or look anywhere else. They found it in him. But then sin enters into the world. Satan deceives Adam and Eve, and they break their relationship with God. And so therefore, now they're looking for contentment and satisfaction somewhere else. And that is our plight in life. This is what happens to us. We begin to think it's about all these other things. Simple abundance is saying, I am no longer going to be looking for the external things of this world to bring about the satisfaction and the contentment in my life. It's going to be found in the relationship, the simple abundance of the relationship of Jesus. It's this quality of life that is found in him. This is the tension that we face. This is the pull we all have at times. When we believe that our life is about something external, when it's actually found something internal, it's found in the relationship with Jesus. Simple abundance is really learning to live a life of faith that says, I am now trusting in my relationship with Jesus, not in the external. So it's not in what I have, it's in the relationship. I know some of us are like, Ron, I know this already, but here's the problem. Sometimes what happens to us when we're trying to grow our faith or move forward in our faith is that these things kind of slip in the side door of our lives and we become distracted. And when we become distracted, worshiping at the altar of more or never having enough, our relationship with Jesus begins to slip to the background of our lives. Recently I was in a conversation with a friend of mine from the church, from our church. And this was just a couple weeks ago. And he was describing his journey of faith. And this guy, just so you know, he's been a church-going guy all his life. He's been a Christian most of his life. From a world's perspective, you would say he's very successful. And he was describing to me about his journey of faith right now. And this guy, I'm telling you, it was like if we weren't sitting in a hot tub, he probably would have been starting to levitate. Like, it was just crazy listening to his story. And he was so pumped and excited about what God was doing in his life. And he was talking about his setting aside time and reading and praying and with his family and with his wife. It was just such a beautiful thing. I said, hey, what's up? Like, what changed? He says, I'm no longer relying upon the external things of my life to bring about contentment and satisfaction. I'm now relying upon my relationship with Jesus. And then he said this, I have found so much more freedom in my life. Wow. See, when we're in the pursuit of more, when we're in the pursuit of accumulating stuff and things, and if we put it at the forefront of our lives, we become slaves to those things. We're not free. We're bound to them. We get consumed by them. And we're not designed to be consumed by those things. We're designed to find contentment and satisfaction in our relationship with Jesus. I had this most amazing moment with him when he was saying this, because he started describing the transformation in his life. That the anger issues were no longer having a control in his life. That the temptations of this life were no longer drawing on him and pulling on him. It was a fascinating moment for me. That is such a beautiful picture of what God intended our relationship to look like with Jesus. Now, it's an important thing to understand something here when it comes to trying to develop this simple abundance, this quality of life that's drawn on our relationship with Jesus rather than on our material things, is that there's a few things that we can do to help with this. One is choose it. I know, you're like, wow, Ron, thanks for telling me that. We get to choose this type of life. We can fight against the compelling push and pull of our society and our culture that says we must have more in order to be successful. We can fight against it when it comes to meaning and purpose in our lives. This is what Jesus did. Think about it this way. Jesus chose simple abundance. I know you probably haven't thought much about that, but he chose that life. Out of all the people that were ever born, we're coming up to Christmas, right? We're coming up to Christmas. We're going to celebrate the baby Jesus. He chose when and where he was going to be born, and he even chose what family he was going to be born into. You didn't, but he did. He chose to be born into a family that was poor. Did you know that? A couple things that indicate that for us is, one, is that when Mary and Joseph went to dedicate Jesus at the temple, do you know that they had to offer up pigeons as a sacrifice, which was a symbol of the lowest in the social realms. They had nothing. They couldn't even offer the typical, usual sacrifice in the dedication of Jesus. They used pigeons. Do you know that Joseph was a carpenter? We go, wow, that's a really good profession. It was like a day laborer. It's not what the carpentry that you're thinking about was not what Joseph was. Jesus was born, you ready for this? He was born where? In a manger, in a barn. Now, we've got to be careful with that. There's some qualification on that. It could have actually been more like a cave setting with stinky smelling animals around. It wasn't this fancy little nativity scenes that we see. He chose that. He chose to live and walk amongst the poor. He chose that. Simple abundance. He didn't own a home. He didn't have any possessions. The clothes that he wore on his back were actually gambled for at his crucifixion. They were just given away. He even chose to give up his divine abilities within himself. Philippians chapter 2 speaks to this. I'll read it actually here. Philippians chapter 2, as long as no one moved it on me. Here it is here. Philippians chapter 2. Verse 6, though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and was born as a human being when he appeared in human form. See those words? He gave up. the King of Kings, the creator of all things, God himself gave up his divine privileges. He set it aside to become fully human. I'm convinced that there are some of us that are so filled with anxiety and worry and the forms of mental health and depression and so on is because we've bought into the social norm that tells us that if you have more, then you're successful. But simple abundance says it's more than that. It's the quality of life that we choose to not allow these things to consume us, but our relationship with Jesus becomes the priority in our lives. And when Jesus becomes the priority in our lives, when we choose that, there's an element of what happens to us where these things begin to fall away and find their proper place in our lives. And we're no longer pulled by the worry and anxiety, depression, and all those things, and a social aspect of those things. So we choose this. The second thing is this, that I think is what we could do in order to adopt this simple abundance mentality is this, is choose to declutter our lives. I mean, think about how simple that would be, but yet how difficult it is. To take our lives and take everything and put it all in front of us and go, okay, what are the things that are necessities and what are not? And this isn't about getting rid of things. It's about what? Prioritizing these things. It's about giving them their proper place. There's this prayer that I came across. Let me see if I can find it here. There's this prayer from Ignatius' Prayer of Exam. It says this, that we're to take everything in our lives and ask this question, does it bring me life, joy, and a sense of gratitude to God? And if it does, then we embrace it and we give thanks. If it doesn't, we put it in its place. We put it in its place. Decluttering our lives, taking everything and saying, does this bring me life? Does this bring me joy? Does this bring me gratitude in my relationship with God? And if not, then I put it in its place. These are the aspects of what it looks like for a simple abundance for us, to be free, to find the hope and the truth that we can find in our relationship with Jesus. So it's this choice that we make. It's the decluttering of our lives, and which some of us probably need to do and take a look at. But then there's this last piece. There's this last piece of understanding the continuation of the abide in the simple abundance is this. It's the focus on our relationship with Jesus. I know it sounds so elementary. I know it sounds so trite, but yet how key it is. How key it is that we find our lives in a place, in a stage, in a season where we say, I must prioritize my walk with Jesus. And listen, I know that there are some of us here that are not even sure who Jesus is and who God is, and that's okay. Keep looking, keep searching, but recognize that there is a power in the relationship with Jesus that can bring the freedom that you so long for. That you do not have to be consumed with the worship of more, but you can be free. Now, I feel strongly that I need to say this. I've felt this strongly all week. Because we've been going through this series, and if you've been tracking with us over the last number of weeks, we've been talking about the spiritual disciplines and the intentional faith patterns that we put into place. Let me be clear. These things don't make you Christian. No more than going to McDonald's makes you Ronald McDonald. Thought that was funny, but anyway. It's not original. I found it somewhere, I think. These disciplines that we've been talking about, meditational prayer, intentional faith relationships, rest and Sabbath, and all the other elements of the spiritual disciplines don't make you a Christian. They don't make you good enough. My deep concern for some of us is that we approach the Christian faith trying to be good enough so that God accepts us. It doesn't work like that. It's not how it works. There's only one who can make you good enough before God, and his name is Jesus. Ephesians 2:8-9 says this. God saved you by his grace when you believed, and you can't take credit for this. It is a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things we have done. No, none of us can boast about it. It's the realization that we will never be good enough to earn God's favor because God is perfect and we never will be. But if we step into that faith relationship with Jesus, we are made right with him. We're reconciled with him. And then we enter into the process of abiding in him with the disciplines that bring about the freshness and the nourishment of being in the relationship, into the vine with him. See, I so long for us to break free from our religious good enough mentality and realize that it is only in the relationship with Jesus can we be free. Only. And then as we develop that relationship, we grow, our roots get stronger, and we find nourishment in him. There are some of us today that have never made that commitment. Never made the commitment to follow Jesus. And you've been tracking for a little bit, and you're at that stage in your journey where you're like, yeah, you know what? I need to make this decision. It's a simple conversation. It's a conversation that says, Jesus, I recognize that I need you in my life. I recognize that I'm broken. I'm sin-filled. That I'll never be good enough. Jesus, by faith, I trust you. There's others of us here this morning that have grown bored in our faith. I don't want you to show your hands, but I know what happens. You get bored because you're putting your trust in the wrong things in your faith journey. Today, will you step back into the continuing in aspect of abiding in Jesus? Because when you do, you find the nourishment for your soul, for your heart, for your mind, and your strength. Listen to this closing song.